The CEO is a very unique animal. I'm Alex Gertzberg, and this is CEO Confidential, where we learn about this rare breed, one heartbreak, one victory, one story at a time. This show is sponsored by the law firm of Gertzberg Licata, your ally for business growth. Folks, welcome to another exciting episode of CEO Confidential. And we've got a really, really special guest today. His name's Christian Klein. Christian wears a lot of hats and always has. And one of them is a fireman's hat. Christian is a volunteer firefighter with the Middlefield Fire Department, where he is also one of the directors. That is not why he's here, although I'm sure his experience there informs why he's here. The reason he's here is because he is the CEO and founder of Company 119, which is this amazing marketing company here in Cleveland. Company 119 was was the number one emerging company for 2 years in the Fast Track 50 list, shortlisted for this year's list as well, so maybe 3 years. Also won the Weatherhead 100 in 2018. Christian, in addition to all of those things, serves on an unconscionable number of nonprofit boards, or either does or did, including being president of the Better Business Bureau, serving on the board of EO Cleveland, previously served on the as entrepreneur chair of the Geauga Growth. Geez, I don't know why I can't talk today, Christian. Geauga Growth Partnership and Leadership Geauga. Christian Klein, welcome to CEO Confidential. Thanks for doing
Alex.
this.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah. You make me feel lazy. All those hats that you've worn. You're a busy dude.
I just have a very forgiving wife. That's really the key to all of it.
Whom I know and have known since she was a child. And you're right. She is a very forgiving lady.
Right.
Becky, thank you if you're listening. Shout out. Hey, Christian. So tell us the story of the day in 2017 that you heard your son answer the phone for one of your customers.
Yeah, probably one of the most kind of heartbreaking moments for me, quite honestly, and not something I like to share. So Alex, not a story I like to tell a lot of people here. So appreciate
this. This is CEO Confidential.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So Company 119, we started in 2004, and it was just really something in my basement, trying to add some additional revenue. I was working in a nonprofit at the time and not making a lot of money. I think it was less than $30,000 at the time. And my wife and I found out that we were pregnant, and we really wanted her to be able to stay at home with our kids when we had them. And so I remember still kind of crying in the driveway, like, how are we going to make this work? So the web was obviously, been around for a few years, but, at that time, less than half companies had websites at the time. Knew a few people that needed it and had learned some programming. And so I started to develop some websites. Those sites look like trash right now, but at the time they were, they were pretty good. So we started building things up, and something I was doing on the side to make ends meet for a while. Ended up buying an IT company for a little while and sold that in 2010 after doing a turnaround, and said, I'm going to only focus on digital marketing at that point. And brought on my now current partner, Nate Winnie, to start to build that up. And Company 119 came to existence at that time as a more formal organization. And it was like a rocket ship at first. I mean, it's easy to double $1 and turn it into two, right? But that's, we were finding that the web was, even more integral to people's lives. We were growing, we grew quickly. We still laugh when we look at our first year's projections at, how rapidly those kind of things came around. And it was a good time. We were in a good place, smart team around us, and we were growing. Like you said before, we hit the regional fastest growing companies multiple times. In 14 and 16, we made the list every year at that point. But quite honestly, a lot of that stuff was what people were seeing on the outside. And it was easy to cover up a lot of dirt when you had that kind of rapid growth. And maybe, some of your listeners can relate to that. But, when sales and revenue coming in are heavy and high, you feel like you could take on the world, right? And that's what it felt like for us. And I was even younger and more naive at that point than I am now. I'm still older and naive, but I was younger and naive at that point. And so we were growing, and we kept adding on to our costs, and we were investing in internal projects, unbillable work is the way that we looked at it. And then we hit a slump about 6 months going into February of 2017, where we got hit in two different ways. We won fastest growing company in 2016, but in the midst of all of that, we had clients that weren't paying us, and our new sales took a slump. And so I went through 6 months where we were losing some serious money. I had eaten through my reserves and felt like a complete moron at that point. Like I couldn't do a single thing right. And all the awards and things like that were being heaped on us, all the accolades, things like that were being heaped on us, I felt like I was a complete lie. I mean, I don't know about you, Alex. You seem much more mature than I am. That's not an age thing. That's just purely a mentality.
You're crazy. Yeah.
But a lot of my identity, I think I tied up into the company at that time. And so those awards just really boosted my ego and things like that. But at the end of the day, it was all just kind of garbage, kind of trash, because the underlying principles, fundamentals of the business weren't what they should be at that time. And so, yeah, it was that kind of fateful day in my life on 2017. I like to be the tough guy and say I've only cried at like 2 funerals right at this point. But that day, I'm driving home from the office, tapped through cash, didn't know what we were going to be doing, was going to have to make some serious decisions. And I'm on the road driving home, and I still remember exactly where I was. I called my wife. One of our business friends, David Payne, had been very kind to offer, like, hey guys, I know you have a lot of stuff. I know it's bad right now. And I reached out to him. He said, why don't you come over to my office? So I'm driving over to Dave's office to kind of go through this stuff. And I call my wife just to let her know I'm going to be late again. And my son picks up the phone, who at the time, I think he was 17. So he would have been about 8, 9 years old at the time. He goes, Company 119, this is Will Klein. And in that moment, like, all the pain that I was going through was just multiplied by 1,000, because in that moment, I felt my son thinking, hey, someday I might get to work for this company. I'm proud of my dad, all that kind of stuff, in a way that I was shocked that he even answered the phone at that point, but that he saw himself in this company that I was driving into the ground. And I was taking good people with me. And at the time, I'm thinking about employees and about myself and being selfish in that. And obviously in my mind, I'm thinking I'm hurting my family, but it didn't become that visceral until that moment where he said that to me. And then I just broke down at that point. It was just all my identity, everything, my self-worth, all that kind of stuff, which was tied up in something, at the end of the day, I think isn't anything. But it just felt like absolutely torn at that point.
So then what happens?
Well, so Dave Payne offered for us to come meet with him. And so we sat down, and it was in that moment that I was able to see example of a business owner that at that moment truly, kind of put aside his personal beliefs, didn't make us feel like we were small or a problem or anything like that to him. He had a million other things going on. This was not something on his radar. He had no benefit in that besides just simply being helpful, and out of his generosity, he was going to be able to help somebody. And he sat down, he went over things, and he asked us the main question that sticks to me today, which is this worth losing your business over, right? So whether it was a cost or it was a client that wasn't paying us and we had to, be the mean guys in order to get the money back, things like that, that simple question of, is it worth losing your company over this, kind of became that mantra for us for that really short period of time.
In other words, so I have it right. He's basically recasting decisions that you were making in terms of, is this a risk that you're really willing to take, whether it's a big customer or AR going too far or whatever.
Yeah. And I mean, the world that I live in on a day-to-day basis in marketing is you're very much trying to put the best face on your organization to the outside world. Like, that's our job. No company hires us and says, hey, can you make us look really, really bad? Right. And we're, let's be honest, every company has problems. They have their warts. Nobody's perfect. No one has their systems down perfectly. No one has their money down perfectly. If they do, they're lying, right? That stuff's just kind of for, Forbes magazine, where you get to be the front page person and you look like you've never made a mistake in your life, right? But that stuff's not real at the end of the day. So I mean, that was the reality for us.
So he takes you through this sort of decision making process. How does your business change? How do you change your decision making? What
Yeah.
changes after February 2017?
Yeah. So there's two things. The first one was this ego element to it, and we can get into later if you want. But I had to fix that side. Like my mindset had to shift at that moment. And then the other piece was getting down to core just good financials, right? Making sure I had the data in the right place. So what he helped us do, build some real simple kind of dashboards that have evolved since then. But it was enable us to look at the key factors that we really needed for our business. What was telling us whether we were successful or not, and getting down to just those core elements. And when you're rapidly growing, and in my background, my dad was a firefighter, my mom stayed at home, right? My grandpa was a plumber, right? I did not come from the Ivy Leagues or anything like that. Everything that I've done has been because I've had good quality people around me that have given me advice that I've been able to take, right? But it wasn't handed to me in any way. But that also means there's a lot of self-learning that you have to do. And so Dave but when you have rapid growth, when you have particularly a product that everybody wants, everybody needs, it's the first time it's getting into the industry, you look like a genius because you're bringing this to the market, but you're in a really good place at that point. And that covered up a lot of the problems. And so I had some underlying issues that those sales numbers were covering up, that at the end of the day, when those sales numbers weren't there, those problems became much larger. So we put dashboards in place that we still use to this day. We brought in transparency then in the organization. So my ego problem had to be solved, and at the same time as we need to look at the data, and both of those problems, when we had the right dashboards, I could no longer escape, right? Like if the sales numbers aren't what they should be, or our collections aren't what they should be, and I have the accountability of the rest of my team around me at that moment, they get to see all your warts, you see all their warts. You're able to be operating from a position of trust and honesty in large part with the team and with those around you, that the kind of the BS kind of falls away, and you're able to just kind of focus on the main thing. And since that point, so we started tracking all that stuff in February 17, and we've only had 1 month when we track it like green, yellow, red. 1 month that has been red in that entire since 17. So just it was a complete turnaround with some basic stuff. I hate even saying it half the time because it's stuff that most people, I'm sure you'd look at me like, oh, that was stupid. You should have figured that out. But once it was in place for me and I could get my ego in check at that point, then we've been able to, be a much more solid company at that point.
Yeah. It's so interesting to me. So after this episode records, but before it posts, you're going to hear the one we just did with Bridget Tebow, who's also an EO with us. And there's this thing that happens with entrepreneurs where they're all, when you're totally focused on chasing revenue and you're good at what you do, you get what you want. But when you take your eye off of profit, right, and you're throwing all those expenses at that revenue, and then one day you realize that right when those sales go away or you have a shitty month, you're like, oh, well, this is really stressful. Right?
Yeah, right.
I am almost insolvent right now.
Yeah, that's right.
And it happens so often. So that takes me to the dashboard. So can you talk about what your dashboard looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of it is home built now. So, we use accounting software, but the accounting software doesn't have the dashboards that we need. So there's a consultant in our industry that works specifically with our types of agencies, and they have data points that they recommended looking against. So I built all that so it can automatically pull our data out of our accounting software, and it dumps it into a Google sheet in essence, and then tells me, here's our months to live, here's our debt to cash ratios, here's what our overhead expenses are today, compared to our, year to date, all those different kind of things. Tracks our utilization. So I know, how much time, forget how much time they're actually tracking to it, but I know how much we should be making with the current staff levels and available billable hours versus where we're actually at, and how we can make, improvements from there. So it boils it all down to one simple to use dashboard. But then for the employees, we also built something where it's taking those data points, assigns a value to that, and then they have an app now where they can see how well they're doing, and then they receive a monthly bonus based on that. So we have 4 different categories. First is how the company's doing, the next is how your department's doing, then doing personally for billable, and then how you're doing on your scorecard. All that, none of it competes with other employees here, but they're able to see exactly how well all of those different pieces are. And then monthly we give them a bonus, and those bonus might be anywhere from, it could be $100, it could be $500, $600, depending on how well the company is doing at that point. So they're incentivized by it. I bring in the transparency into all of it. It's now their individual income that's based on it, so they have a higher level of attention to it. And then we provide that transparency so they can see it very easily. That's provided a lot of checks and balances. It's, we're not perfect, but it's definitely provided quite a bit of additional tools for us now.
And where are the dashboards? Are they all like, you have to, like, I'm trying to imagine logistically, right? Are they on big flat screen TVs? Are they on people's computers?
Right on their phone.
Oh, you got them on the phone.
Yeah, so we turn it into a mobile app so they can actually just go onto their phone and then see where all that kind of data is at that point. So they know, we call it the X bonus, but they can see at any point, here's what your X bonus is during, at this month. And those financials change on a day-to-day basis. So pulls the data out day to day, they can see exactly kind of where those are at. Now, that being said, once the tool got implemented, the times that they look at the app once it's there is minimal. They might check it once a month at best, right? The fact that it exists, though, they can take a reliance on, right? It's kind of like your insurance. You don't think about the insurance that you bought when you bought it, right? Maybe every once in a while you check in on it. Somebody brought the topic up, and so you check in on it. But if if you were to get a letter today saying your insurance is going away, you now have a huge level of anxiety that gets dropped on you. It's the same type of thing with that kind of tool. They know it's there. They know they can go and check it. And so, but they don't all the time. But if it were to be taken away, then that would become a big issue and a big hole in our kind of dependency. So
I'm spending a lot of time on this dashboard for a reason. I think that it's so important, and because so many of us, when we start our business, ignore the most important numbers. So each employee sees company-wide numbers and then also individual performance numbers for themselves, right? And then
yeah.
Right.
Now, there's some data points that is not helpful for them to see. So sometimes, so in my opinion, sometimes expenses aren't always things that the entire staff needs to see or be influenced by, right? They can't control those expenses all the time in our world. And so we will use a multiplier in that. So I'll still take the actual data, I apply a value to that, and that's the multiplier. So they can still see that number, what percentage of our goal we're hitting, but they don't see what the actual goal, they don't see every element of that goal. Revenue, they see all of that. They see down to the specific dollar amount of what we sold this month. But as far as profitability, efficiency, things like that, they see those as multiples.
Have you ever built one of these dashboards for a client of yours?
No, we've only done it for ourselves. I've shown it to a few businesses, like in EO and things like that, and everybody likes it. But yeah, we haven't really launched it to anybody else yet.
Yeah, I mean, because we're doing that right now, but we're like where you were in 2017, like just like, all right, we know this is a good idea, and so we just came up with the numbers that we want everybody to track, and then the numbers that just leadership is going to track, and we decided we were going to put it into an intranet. Right. Yeah. That was going to pop up on everyone's screen, like right when they came in the morning. I think you got a product there, Christian. I think that, I mean, it's brilliant.
I think it's helpful. The big thing for me though, is building the system, right? If it's something that takes somebody having to manually go in there and update data points and things like that, it's never going to happen. And then it falls away. So if it's not automated, it's probably not going to happen long term. Right. So, or you're going to waste time on it.
Yeah. So you said two things changed after that phone call in 2017. Yeah. One was you started understanding KPIs better and started utilizing them through these dashboards. But the other thing that you said is there was an ego element that changed and there was a mindset shift. Talk more about that.
Yeah. So I subscribe to the thought that eventually all the problems in the company flow back to me in one way, shape, or form. So if somebody messed up, I either hired the wrong person for it, I didn't provide the right training, something changed and I'm not providing the right coaching, or they shouldn't be on the team, but I've allowed them to continue to be on the team, and those kind of things have to change. It doesn't mean that I'm 100% responsible for everything, but at the end of the day, the buck stops with me. And there's an ego trip that can go with that for sure. But also I think, and so initially when everything's good, you're like, well, I get responsibility for everything. So that's great. When they get bad, then you start to turn on those kind of things. So for me, that's what I found. I had to take responsibility for this stuff, and not just the way that politicians say they take responsibility for stuff, which is yeah, it's absolutely my fault, but I don't want to face the consequences. The data now that we're able to get is able to kind of point that back, and I can see exactly where those kind of issues are coming from.
So let me paraphrase what I think I just heard you say to make sure I understand it, because there's there's the ego that comes with um, owning everything that happens in your company. And the way that kind of backfires is you take everything very personally, and you also assume that you know everything, right?
Right.
And it sounds like in, after February 2017, the mindset shift was, I'm going to be a lot more unemotional here and separate myself from the events of the company, in the sense that everything isn't all my fault or my credit. There is logic here, and it's my job to problem solve, as opposed to take, an egocentric view of everything. Is that a
Yeah,
fair
that's
characterization?
correct.
Yeah.
I think when you're
Yeah.
when you're making decisions just purely based on your gut, then you do get a lot more credit for those kind of things that work out well. And then when it goes poorly, you take a lot of that and you
Mm,
internalize it. And as CEOs, we don't have a lot of individuals that we can just go to and talk to that can relate to us. I mean, you can't go to an employee and say, here's all the stress that's on my plate. And then you get in a car that's probably twice the cost of what theirs is. And there's no
right.
relation in those kind of ways. And so you internalize a lot of that. That's not always a healthy thing to do, especially when things are going really poorly. So, yes, it doesn't mean that since 17, everything's been perfect and great. Like, we go through some bad times. Oftentimes it's because I forget some of those primary responsibilities. But at the end of the day, I still have to realize this is an engine. This is a company that's here. I need to do the best I can, but I shouldn't be tying my self identity just purely to the successes and failures of the organization.
Yeah. It's also interesting to me that a lot of the change that happens after February 2017 happens after you bring in this friend of yours, this third party, who kind of is
Yeah.
able to be more objective than you were being, right? Is able to look at the situation unemotionally,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which is another concept that shows up again and again and again with successful companies. It's when the owners and founders are able to rely on third parties who aren't there every single day. Is that something that you've continued to rely on? Having maybe it's the same person, but just relying on third parties to sort of help you be objective?
Yeah, absolutely. So I get a lot of that out of EO now as well, but then I still have Dave Payne, then I have
Mm,
select individuals depending on what the issue is that I can go to and bounce back. But here's the key, I would say, to really utilizing that relationship correctly.
excuse me.
Um, don't just
Allergies. Yeah.
You're good.
Sorry. Go ahead.
That's good. The one thing I would say in just leveraging those well, don't just call them when you're having
Mm,
problems. So as soon as we had kind of turned the corner and then we had money in the bank again and we were actually in a safe spot, first person I called was Dave Payne. Like, listen, thanks so much for, he may have even forgotten at that point for what he'd done for us. Just going back and telling him, like, listen, man, thank you so much for what you did. That was a huge blessing for us. Like, here's where we're at now. Here's the situation. And he knew what we were in our worst. You could also tell that that's good to encourage those kind of relationships as well. But yeah,
well,
I
yeah.
absolutely believe going back to those advisory boards are of huge value. If you don't have those kind of areas, and even if you do, sometimes they're worth a lot of value.
And to be clear, because I'm sure folks are now wondering, Dave Payne, is he is another business owner, or is he a coach? Is he?
That's a great question. Yeah. So Dave Payne, he's another, he's near me in our geographic area. And he owns a large home remodeling company. And so we had worked together at different times and we were personal friends. Then after a while, we were in a mastermind group together.
Hmm.
He was one of those individuals that I always knew he would do what was right, regardless of what whether it was financially strong or not. And he gave multiple examples of that over the years where that was the case. So I knew in going to him that I had a level of confidence and confidentiality that I'd have with him, number one, but also that he wasn't going to just give me the advice of here's what you do, screw anybody else, you got to be selfish about it kind of thing. But here's how you do it in the right way for the sake of others as well. And that type of mindset was very helpful for me at the time, because if I would have at that moment said, okay, it's still all about me, I got to do whatever I can. And you can interpret that advice he gave me, which was, is this worth losing your company, as being selfish? But when it comes from an individual that they have the right type of moral compass, I know that him saying that didn't mean here's what you do, screw everybody else at the time, just do what's best for you at that point. It was, here's how you fix this so that you can save your family, you can save your core employees, you can build this back up so that you can do more good with it in the long run.
Yeah. Have you talked to your son in the last, 2017, so 4 years, and explained to him that he was sort of the impetus for this giant, like, colossal shift in your business, that one phone call that he had that just struck you to your core?
I have thought about it. I haven't shared it with him. Number one, I don't know if he can fully appreciate it quite yet. But because he hasn't been in those shoes, I know that at some point he will get it. But he's right now, he's working on doing coding classes because he really wants to get an internship with Company 119, as in a couple of years when he's older. So I know in him that hasn't died. So at least for me, there hasn't been a breakdown in his mindset in those ways right now. And for his trajectory, I haven't found it yet to like spoil everything. Like, hey man, this company may not be here, so don't get your hopes up. I haven't gotten to that point yet. With him, but eventually he'll grow up. And
all he has to do is listen to this episode, and he'll see how instrumental he was. And
well, fortunately, I control the Wi-Fi password at home. So be able to listen to this one.
And by the way, Company 119 firefighting.
Yeah.
Right. It's in your logo, I think. I mean, that is. Give me why Company 119?
Well, so we originally started at 119 Main Street, and we wanted to, at the time, every marketing company was just dropping the vowels out of their name, and that's how they picked what they were called. And so we wanted to go with more of a traditional, easy to understand, but more than anything else, like a hardworking, for the sake of others kind of brand, right? So our second core value here is run toward fire. So the concept was, let's do the hard things, but we're not going to just do the hard things. We're not going to just do it for ourselves. We're going to do it for others, for the sake of others, in their growth and their success and their survival. We'll also find that growth, and survival and things like that. So we focus on CAP. Our acronym here is CAP: communication, anticipation, preparation, but all core elements of a successful emergency situation. Good communication with your team members, anticipating what's going to happen with the emergency before it even happens, and then preparing before the event. Firefighters don't show up to your house and it's their first fire they've ever been on, and they're like, oh, I have no idea what we're going to do here. I guess maybe try water or something like that. Like, there's a lot of training that goes into it so that when that happens, you're able to respond to it. And so those core elements have been, kind of what helped us with from our imagery and things like that.
It's so interesting to me to hear you say that, because you're right. Like, I mean, if you're going to create a framework, a foundation for a business, you really couldn't choose a better model than a fire company, right? And because I'm always driving past them, and I'm like, why are they always polishing that freaking fire truck? Like, why are they? I mean, is it because they're bored? And I talked to a firefighter once, and he goes, part of it is to make sure that everything's running the way it's supposed to when you need it. But the other part is because it's part of it. It is part of the ethic of the firefighter, right? Which is everything has to be crisp and perfect and just in lockstep when things, when you need it. It's not just about making it work well when you need it. It's about the ethic that it takes to make that happen. And so the fact that you've built, that into the fabric of your marketing company is brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, the expectation, if you have an emergency, your expectation is that those guys know what they're doing and they're going to execute on it. And the nice thing about it too, quite honestly, from personal experience, is they never ask your name. Like, when you show up, you're there to help them. They're not asking what your name is or anything. They're just expecting you to do the job, do it well, because they're having their absolute worst day right now. right?
Oh,
And
wow.
they rely on you. There's a lot of, we're not putting out fires at Company 119 or anything like that. But at the end of the day, I still want our team taking things with that level of seriousness that, okay, our clients are only going to think about their marketing maybe 10% of their month, things like that. But when they are thinking about it, it's a really big deal to them at that point.
Yeah.
You need to be ready. Don't act like this is the first time we've ever built a website or run a paid search campaign or done any of that. Behave in a way that you know what they're going to ask you, and then you know what their follow-up question is going to be. If you can do those things right, they're going to trust you even more. And quite honestly, that's, one of our other core values is treat your service as a craft. Like, get better at it. This is not just the job. Take ownership of your career and turn it into a craft.
Yeah. No, I love that it just screams professionalism.
Now, some firms are kind of fat, and they could a little bit. I include myself in that, but yeah. Everything else.
Christian, I've learned a lot. Thank you for being on the show. That was a lot of great information. Folks, it's company119.com. There's a great blog there, company119.com/dispatch. Christian's on Twitter at Klein Inc. And on LinkedIn at Christian Klein. So go there and check them out. Christian, thanks a lot, man. This was great.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, it's great talking to you again. Really appreciate it.
All right, man. Folks, we will see you next time. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening to CEO Confidential. I hope you enjoyed it. Visit us at ceoconfidential.net and visit our sponsors, the business law firm of Gertzberg Licata and Cover My Six, a business solution that flushes out and repairs legal minefields before they blow up in court. We'll see you next time right here for another episode of CEO Confidential.